Alright, so today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about different types of equations that you might see outside of Algebra 1. So today in Algebra we're doing one or two step equations, but what are some different types of equations that you might see down the road in Geometry or Algebra 2? Okay, so today we're going to focus on equations that have squared terms in them. So for example, you might see an equation that looks like x squared equals 9. How would we solve something like this? So first thing we have to talk about is what does it mean to square a number? So you guys may know that to square a number, like 3 squared, just means that we're multiplying that number by itself, right? So 3 times 3, which would be equal to 9. Or if you have a number like 4 squared, then that means we're doing 4 times 4, which is equal to 16. Okay? So if we have something like x squared means we're taking a number x and we're multiplying it by itself, x again. Okay, so if we're trying to solve an equation like x squared equals 9, what that's really asking us to do is to figure out what number times itself is equal to 9. Okay, so if you were looking up above, you could have put this together that 3 times 3 is equal to 9, and so that a good answer for x squared equals 9 would be x equals 3. Okay, and that's great. But there's actually a second answer that's going to work here. So if you think about x squared equals 9, there's a second number that when you multiply by itself could be equal to 9. Okay, so what could that number be? Well, if we think about what we know about negative numbers, when we multiply a negative number times another negative number, a negative times a negative gives us a positive number. Okay, so what this means is anytime we're solving an equation, a squared term like x squared equals 9, we're going to have two solutions here. And so those two solutions to x squared equals 9, we would have x is equal to 3, or we could have x is equal to negative 3. And so in this case, we have two solutions to this equation. Okay, so what are we doing here? Do we always just have to know the number or just be able to figure this out in our head? So when we're solving an equation that has an x squared in it, okay, we're trying to figure out what is the opposite of squaring a number, or what is the inverse of squaring that number. And so just like multiplication has an inverse operation, division, or addition has an inverse operation, which is subtraction, squaring a number or squaring a term like x squared also has an inverse, and that inverse is taking the square root of that number. Okay, so if we had a number we didn't know what the square root was, we could use our calculator and we could find the square root of that number by typing it into Desmos or into our handheld calculator and finding that value. Okay, so in this case, the square root of 9, our calculator would tell us 3, but then we would have to know it's not just 3, it's also negative 3, since negative 3 squared is equal to 9. Okay, so let's look at some other examples here. So what if our equation has more to it than just an x squared term? Maybe we have something like 2 times x squared minus 1 equals 17. Okay, so when we see something like this, just like when we are solving equations in class, we're going to kind of do some order of operations in reverse here, right? So first thing we would do is get rid of the minus 1, so we'd add 1 to both sides, and that would give us 2x squared equals 18. And then we would get rid of this 2, so this is 2 times x squared, so divide by 2, and then that would give us x squared equals 9. And then we're right back to where we were a second ago, right? We're looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 9, and we know now that those two numbers could either be x equals 3 or x equals negative 3. Okay, so nothing too scary here. We have a squared term x. We're trying to isolate it, which means we're going to remove everything else and get x by itself. Okay, so the last little piece of this puzzle that we're going to look at today is, what if I have something like this, where instead of just having an x squared term already there, I have something like x plus 1 squared. Okay, so going back to our conversation a little bit ago, when I'm squaring something, that means I'm going to multiply by itself. So in this case, I'm going to have x plus 1 times x plus 1. So if you remember back from last year, when we have some multiplication happening like this, we have to FOIL or distribute. So we're going to do x times x and x times 1, and then we're going to do 1 times x and 1 times 1. So we call this FOILing or distributing. So when we do x times x, that gives me x squared, and then x times 1 is 1x, and then we have another 1 times x, that's another 1x, and then we have 1 times 1, which is 1. And then we can combine these terms in the middle. We have a 1x and another 1x, so when we combine those, that gives me a 2x. So we end up with x squared plus 2x plus 1. Okay? So anytime you see something like this, x plus 1 squared, that means we're multiplying x plus 1 times itself. We can FOIL or distribute and then simplify. Okay, so if we bring that back to this problem over here, we'd have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 2x plus 15. Okay, so now I'm ready to try to solve the rest of this equation. So I got to get my x's on the same side. So I'm going to do a minus 2x on both sides. So that gets rid of my 2x's. 2x minus 2x is 0. And then I'm going to do a minus 1 on both sides. So I'm left with x squared equals 14. Okay, so this is the last step. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. So when I take the square root of 14, well, we're asking ourselves what number times itself equals 14. Well, I don't have a number off the top of my head where that works. Okay, so we just leave it. We leave it as the square root of 14, and we remember that it could be the positive version of the square root of 14, or it could be the negative version of the square root of 14. Okay, so this would be called an irrational number, but it's okay to have these as values, right? We could type it in a calculator, but it's going to be a non-repeating decimal, and so we'll just leave it as positive square root of 14 and negative square root of 14. Okay, so that's it for the video for today. So go ahead and give those practice problems a try, and let your teacher know if you need any help.